A lot of the people who I think listen to this podcast are in businesses, not nonprofits. And yet, the need for on-the-job training and the need for quickly adapting to changes in circumstances. Everybody's always talking about it's a fast-moving environment. Of course, it's always a fast-moving environment. But it seems like what you have to deal with on a routine basis is really dynamic, and especially now. Welcome to the Nice Business Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Train, business, leadership, and culture consultant, and Vistage CEO, Peer Advisory Group Chair. And I'm joined by my friend, Jim Bob Howard, veteran technical consultant. Together, we have more than 60 combined years of business and organizational experience. The purpose of this podcast is to have short but meaningful discussions about the people and culture side of business and how owners and executives can be both kind and successful. Hey, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Nice Business Podcast. And today, Jim Bob and I are very lucky to have Linda Braddy, who is the CEO of Red Cross of North Texas. But as we'll get into, your duties really encompass a lot more than just running the North Texas area. Anyway, Linda, thank you for joining us. And I do want to get into talking about an issue that I think probably affects a lot of businesses or organizations out there, in the fact that, like them, you have a very dynamic workforce that works with you. You have both volunteers as well as employees. And you have a very transient group that tends to come in to help in very special circumstances. And it's a lot to manage. So why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are, and a little bit about what you do at Red Cross North Texas.
Okay. I spent the majority of my career in higher ed. I started out as a math professor, went through traditional sort of career advancement, opportunities, department chair, dean, vice president, president. And I did have a stint in Washington, D.C. for about 4 years at a nonprofit that was highly dependent on volunteers. And so when I got ready to transition out of higher ed, the Red Cross people asked me, oh my goodness, how did you go from college president to Red Cross? It seems very different, but it's actually very similar. So I did a lot of fundraising and community engagement when I was president, and very similar with the Red Cross. And then the time I was in DC, highly dependent upon volunteers. And so I really had all the components in my background to do this. And so when I was leaving higher ed, I did consider other sectors, and I couldn't get away from the mission-driven aspect of nonprofits. Right. And so that's what really fuels me day to day. And so at the Red Cross, our humanitarian services organization, we have a component that probably people are very familiar with, our disaster response. Some people know that we also serve military families, military members, military families. Some people know that we also do biomedical. We have biomedical services. We do blood drives. We manage 40% of the blood supply in the country. Right. And then some people know that we do CPR and first aid classes and swimming lessons and lifeguarding classes and things like that. And then we do some international services. Sometimes we respond to humanitarian crises across the globe. We participate in some vaccine programs in various places. And we also do preparedness ahead of disasters. And so we do some resiliency training for military members. And so this is separate from disaster work, right? With the preparedness programs, we want communities and families to be prepared before a disaster strikes so that they recover faster. Right. And better. So that's a big component as well.
That's a lot. You do a lot. Of course, I first probably knew of Red Cross from blood drives and donating blood and lifeguarding and things like that. But yes, absolutely. Obviously, later got to know of what you do for disaster recovery and relief and things like that. But part of the conversation that we had initially before this recording really had to do with the challenges that you face as an organization in hiring the right people, training them, appropriately for what you need, especially when you have some of them are volunteer based and some of them are, they only come in at that particular event that you're having to deal with. How did you address making sure that your people are properly trained for something like that?
Well, the Red Cross has been around for over 140 years. And so I like to say that our disaster operation is a well oiled machine. We have a very structured process for bringing in volunteers, for training them, ensuring they have the skills they need if they're going to be involved in some aspects of our service delivery. Then, as you mentioned, we might have people who show up when we have a large sheltering operation. For instance, in North Texas last year, we had tornadoes that came through Sanger Valley View all the way over east out to Garland, that area out there. And people will show up just to help hand out water, serve food or whatever. And when we had Hurricane Beryl in Houston, same kind of thing. People can show up and just say, I want to help. And there are things that those folks can do as well. So we do have both aspects, but we have to be prepared to engage the people who show up, as event-based volunteers and have things for them to do. And then we have to make sure that we do have these well-trained volunteers who can manage a shelter, right? Or manage the logistics operation when you have a large operation like Hurricane Beryl and you have lots of vehicles coming and going and you have food trucks going out to serve people food. And there's lots and lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. And those folks do need a little more training ahead of time. And so we have people who have done hundreds of hours of training, and you can't tell them apart from our paid staff. You think they're staff.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That whole thing just seems so overwhelming to me. I think about all of the aspects of, if I were to show up and just pick a disaster. If I were to say, hey, I'm going to go show up, I don't want to help with this. What could I do? What is it that I could do? There's going to be somebody there that's going to train you. But that also means that person's not actually serving because they're training somebody to help serve. And if you don't have enough volunteers, or if you have too many volunteers, or it's just a constant logistics change, right, going on, that sounds like a three-ring circus to me. like when the music stops, I hope there's a chair I can grab, but that sounds like an amazing thing to try to keep a hold on and keep a grasp on. So when you think about that, so you think about all these people that come up and people want to be able to help, right? I mean, that's what they're like, hey, Red Cross is here to serve. I want to go serve. I want to help in some way. And then they show up and they're like, but you don't have the skills or you don't have the training. And so you can't, obviously they probably hand out a water bottle, but whatever it is that you're like, yeah, we need you to hold back on that, but you can help over here in this situation. And then you have to disappoint someone who's shown up to help by telling them they can't help in the way they want to, but they've got to help in a different way if they'd like to stay. Just maybe talk a little bit about that from that perspective. Maybe give us an anecdote or something of what that really looks like.
Well, the most recent example that was large scale that I participated in was the Hurricane Beryl response. And we did have a lot of volunteers show up. And most people that I have experienced since I've been here less than 3 years, but most of those situations, they're willing to help whatever way we need. And so I haven't found anybody sort of resistant to, oh, you want me to do this, but I really want to do that. Now, what we also do, though, we will do training on the spot. So we do have people who are our workforce engagement folks who are there at a disaster who can do live training for people. And so like if you are willing to help us do sheltering, then you can do a 4-hour course and be ready to go. And you'll know what you need to know to go work in a shelter. And so we can do that on the spot. And so it may be that we have people who show up and they do know how to drive a box truck. They have some experience and they're willing to do some lifting and hauling and all of that. And so there is some training that they can do, but we also can send them out with someone else. We can pair them up and figure out what their abilities are so we can do on-the-job training and figure out what are they really capable of. And then they may become a long-term volunteer who wants to continue that even after the disaster happens. So we really do. It is an all call, and we really do have something for everyone. I feel like a short term, a one time, a long term, a periodic, once a month, whatever it is that you can give, we can use it.
Wow. So it's like hiring and firing and onboarding and offboarding and training and growth and all of that in a 4-hour time period or 8-hour time period or whatever.
Yes. And lots of on the job training. So this is something that I did not have when I was at the nonprofit in DC. But with the Red Cross, as I mentioned, it's very well structured and organized. But even in other lines of service, we have a whole process of volunteers moving up the ladder. So you come in as a service associate and you do more training, do more work, get some hours of experience. You can apply to be a supervisor in that same line of service.
Even as a volunteer.
You do more, even as a volunteer. Oh my goodness, we have job directors who are volunteers. I'm telling you, you don't know the difference. Like I worked with someone for a week one time and swore she was a staff member. She was the chief of staff or the job director. She's like, no, I'm just a volunteer. And so we have a volunteer who is our volunteer partner for our chief disaster officer. And he's been there in that role for maybe 10 years. He has access to our software systems. He keeps stuff updated. He can pull data for us. It took me about a month to really realize he was a volunteer. I thought he was a staff member too. So we have, again, all levels of sort of need for volunteers, right? You can get as engaged as you would like to be.
Interesting. I would assume that so many of the people that work there with you, let me go back and say that a lot of the people who I think listen to this podcast are in businesses, not nonprofits. And yet the need for on-the-job training and the need for quickly adapting to changes in circumstances is something that, I can tell you, every place I've ever worked, and Jim Bob, I would assert you too, everybody's always talking about it's a fast-moving environment. Of course, it's always a fast-moving environment, but
not as fast as.
But it seems like what you have to deal with on a routine basis is really dynamic, and especially now. So how we talked about in our previous conversation about the cadence of disasters that are happening seem to be a lot more frequent, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or what have you. That those are just the natural disasters, much less other things that you deal with. How have you been adapting for something like that, even though you have a well-oiled machine kind of a process? And then I'm specifically asking so that our listeners might be able to glean something from that.
Yeah. So thinking about businesses, you probably are in a business where you have some kind of client, customer, right? And so we do call the people we serve clients. We intentionally do not say, victims, right? We say clients because we're there to serve them. And we do pay attention to client satisfaction. We do surveys, right? And we hear from them on a regular basis about what's working, what's not working. Also, when we think about how to serve our clients, I have an excellent example I have a couple of really great examples of how we have adapted on the fly. So typically when there's a disaster that's like a tornado, we would give people emergency supplies in the beginning, in addition to something they might need, like a comfort kit or, toothbrush, shampoo, washcloth and stuff if they come to our shelters.
Right.
But for them to start cleaning up at their home, we would typically give them rakes and shovels and trash bags and buckets and gloves and things like that. When you think about tornado debris and cleaning up,
Sure.
we would give that. If it was a flood or hurricane where there's flooding, we would instead give mops and buckets and bleach and that kind of thing, right, to clean up that kind of damage. So last year when we had Milton and Helene that came through and hit so far up in the mountains in the Asheville area, and those communities were devastated. The roads were out. Well, their homes were damaged, but not to the point that they were unlivable. They could stay there. They didn't have electricity. And so we did what we could to get help for them on that. But specifically, instead of giving them buckets and mops and rakes and shovels and all that, we gave them camp stoves and sweatshirts and socks because it was getting cold.
Right.
And so we adapted on the fly because that was what they needed. When we were in Hawaii, when Lahaina, the tragedy there with the fires, about a week in, we figured out that normally what we would have done was we would use local volunteers for the first couple of days until we could fly people in to support however much was needed. Well, there was a lot of, volunteer support needed. But what we figured out quickly was that their economy had been devastated because it was based on tourism.
Right.
And so those folks didn't have jobs. So instead of flying people in from the continental United States, we hired people locally and trained them.
Good.
And so that contributed to their economy. And that's a matter of what do our customers need now, or what do our clients need now, and how quickly can we adapt to that need? And so I feel like any business, right, as things are changing quickly, how quickly can you change and adapt? Because I'll just say, people probably don't have to be convinced that higher education is not the fastest model of adaptation. So this was very different for me in a really great way, because sometimes higher ed, you would feel like, I think we could move a little faster on this, right? And so this has been great for me. I like to move fast and make sure that we're adapting as needed and making changes. And now there are some challenges with that. When you have volunteers who have been with you for 50 years, which we have many,
Wow.
longer than employees have been here, it can be hard for them to change. It's like, no, that's not how we do it. We do it this way. And they are looking out for the best interest of the Red Cross. They have the best intentions. And so it can be, as you know, when you have long-term employees, it can be hard. Change can be hard for them. So it's also a challenge where that's concerned, right? When it comes to the change and the flexibility and adapting.
So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. Well, I know one of my favorite sayings is that when you are sick and tired of saying it, they are just starting to hear it. So the communication aspect, you have to say it over and over and over again in different settings to different people, to everyone. And you just have to become a broken record about the changes and how we're doing things now, right? So to me, that's one of the most important things. And then just staying the course, but having empathy and understanding for the people who are struggling, and understanding, yes, I know this can be really hard. And some people do jump on board and they're eager to make changes. Other people, not so much. And so if you can find the leaders, even the informal leaders that don't have a positional title,
Right.
who can lead the others, that's also helpful. You get those people who are influential in those circles and get them on board, and then they bring everybody else along, or everybody who can be brought along, they can help bring them along.
I want to go back to when you're sick and tired of saying it, they're just starting to hear it. I want every CEO, every director, every VP to hear that. Your people can't read your mind. And yes, because you've said it, they heard it probably, but if things don't change or they don't hear it again, or they need to be told that a lot. They need to be told what the direction is. I've worked for organizations that maybe put the mission statement on the wall and then hope that everybody reads it on a daily basis. It's not like we're doing a Pledge of Allegiance where you have to say it, but then I've been in other organizations where it may be on the wall, it may be on a shirt somewhere, but it's in every meeting where we start the meeting talking about these are our values, these are what we're doing. Yeah. And the truth of it is even those who have been there for a long time need to be reminded, but you've also got new people. You get people that haven't, maybe they missed the last meeting, or maybe they just joined the organization, and they need to know that, and they all need to know that this is still the direction that we're going. And if something changes, we're going to change this message here, and we're going to repeat it over and over again. Yeah. That's a little bit of gold there. When you're sick and tired of saying it, they're just starting to hear it. I think that's great.
You mentioned, so I can't believe you mentioned this, the values. So we have a values moment at the start of every leadership team meeting. Excellent. And so give me an example of where you saw somebody demonstrating one of our values. Tell me what happened. Tell us what happened. And it's kind of a brags moment, too. Yeah. Like we're going to brag on somebody that did something, and we're going to tell you how that demonstrated one of our values. Right. So I think my third month on the job, we did a leadership retreat, and we created our own set of leadership team values. We have 5 values, but we also have behaviors, which I had not really seen before in this way. What does this look like? How do we behave? The fact that we have courage as a value, what does that look like? Right. And so we put specific things there. And then each year, we just had a retreat, and each year we go back and we go, okay, are these really still our values? Are we living these? Do we need to make updates? So we've updated them a couple of times we just did about 2 weeks ago, we had a retreat and we looked at them again. And so we reaffirmed those 5 values are our values, but maybe the behaviors, we want to make some edits on that. Doing that at each meeting, I think, is important. And having the behaviors along with the values, I think, is important.
How much does that trickle down to, like, in the moment crises as well? Does that get communicated, to the volunteer who just showed up as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think probably what gets communicated, maybe more than our values, is the Red Cross principles. We have 7 principles. One is humanity, right? Humanitarian service. Another is independence. Another is impartiality. We serve everyone, right? So we talk about those a lot in service delivery, right? We don't turn anyone away. We serve everyone the same, and all of that.
I think that's one of those things that all of our listeners need to hear, is that the values and the principles and the mission that you have need to not just be a once a year, once a 5-year thing that you hope that people get. It's got to be something they can communicate on a regular basis. You talk to them on a regular basis so that you actually stay that course, right? Because when new people join, if you are going through a crisis, maybe the stock market goes south, maybe there's a hiring issue, maybe there's some new technology that's a challenge to the organization, being able to say, okay, well, let's get back to our core values and our principles and why we're here, what we're focusing on. Now we can go and address this new issue that's come up. And maybe that would allow folks to say, hey, we're a fast-paced environment, to really see, well, we're not as fast-paced as the Red Cross, but we could be because we communicate our values.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of people can tell you what our mission statement is. Like, I've said it enough. I've been here less than 3 years, but it's to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and donors. A lot of our folks, including volunteers, could tell you what that is, to prevent and alleviate human suffering, right? They know that. We have said that a lot, and it's been the same mission statement for a long, long time.
Something about this part of the conversation kind of strikes me, reminds me of similar sentiments that I was having a conversation with a prospective, I'm a Vistage peer advisory chair. And so I was talking with a guy who's potentially going to be a member. And we were talking about his fast-paced environment and how there's always something more to do. There's always something more to do on any particular thing. And I was talking about, what does done look like? And so it gets me to thinking about you and what you have to deal with when you're going into an area and you are dealing with some really hard stuff. Take, for instance, what happened in North Carolina that you were cleaning. They're still cleaning up after that. What does done look like for the Red Cross in some of those really big situations?
Yeah, well, done, the initial phase of done is that we have everyone moved out of our shelters into more permanent housing. So we do casework for everybody that comes through our shelters. And even if there's something that we don't provide specific services they need, we connect them to local organizations that do. So we provide mental health counseling initially. If they need it longer term, we connect them to organizations. When we open a shelter, our goal is to close the shelter, because that means that everybody is moved out. They're on the path to recovery. They're down the road to recovery, right? Because they're living in more permanent housing now. So that's our initial done, is to get our shelters closed in a very positive way. And then we sometimes have donors who will designate their dollars to serve a particular disaster. So we love it when they trust us to use it where it's needed most. We even have this thing called WINM, where it's needed most. And so we appreciate people who will donate to us financially and let us place it where it's needed. But sometimes people feel very strongly they want to raise money specifically for, Hurricane Helene or whatever. And so we aren't done until we have expended all those funds for Hurricane Helene. So we have additional assistance that we can go back and do once we have done the initial getting our shelters closed, making sure people are on the road to recovery. If we still have funding left over, we go back and do what's called bridge assistance, which means we might go back and give individuals additional financial assistance, or we might give grants to community organizations. Like we did that with an organization in Louisiana one time where they put in some solar panels because that would serve the whole community at one of the centers in the town. And so we decide on a case by case basis how we're going to expend the rest of the funds. So until those are gone, we aren't done. And so right now we call it long-term recovery going on the Central Texas floods that occurred on July 4th. We are still working on long-term recovery on that. Way back 2 years ago in February, when we had the large wildfire out in the Texas Panhandle, largest one ever in the state, right. We're still doing long-term recovery on that. We haven't even wrapped that up yet.
Yeah.
Because we raised so much money designated for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you maintain morale during any of these events where maybe you don't have enough just physical resources, maybe you don't have enough people resources, or the situation is just so heartbreaking that it's hard to serve? What's the path there?
Well, we are very adamant about people taking time off whether they're staff or volunteers. So normally we would ask people, if you go outside your region, we ask you to deploy for 2 weeks away from home. And then sometimes if it's going well and you have time, we'll ask you to stay another week. But we always require people to take the 7th day off. So you work 6 days and you take 1 off. Now that's in a disaster that's just a natural disaster sort of thing. When it's a mass fatality, we ask people to take a day off every 3 days because of the secondary trauma that they're absorbing, right. Especially the people who are working directly with the families impacted by fatalities in their family. And so we're very, again, adamant about people doing that. We also, oh my goodness, every stand-up at these disasters, it is take care of yourself and take care of your fellow Red Crossers. Watch out for each other. Make sure that if you feel like somebody's getting a little bit stressed out over something or whatever, pull them aside, like have them step aside, like see if you can help them. And so we really do emphasize self-care in that regard, and also looking out for each other in terms of, the mental stress and that kind of thing that people might be undergoing. And then staying focused on the mission. People are there because they want to help. Right. And we've had volunteers who they go for 2 weeks and we say, you have to take a day off. And they're like, you can tell me that, but I'm here to work and I'm not going to take a day off. So, you can't force them if they're intent on that, but they know themselves well enough to know that they can handle it for 2 weeks. And so we don't force them. We don't lock them out, but we do recommend that. And so staying focused on the mission and the fact that you're helping people. I have a great story from a volunteer in Hawaii who had some interactions with one of our clients, and the lady was quite upset. As you can imagine, she's lost everything. Right. She had some difficulty when she arrived at the shelter and that sort of thing. When this volunteer was interacting with her, the client just blasted her. And then the next time she saw her, same thing. So when we were talking to her about her experience, it was sort of like you expect her to say, well, then when I saw her again, then she was better and we hugged and it was all good. And it was like, no, every time I saw her, that's what happened. And so my colleague that was talking with this volunteer said, that must have been really hard for you. And she goes, that's why I'm here. She said, I'm here to help people with that. If that's what they need to do, that's why I'm here. So she was for it, and whatever people need from her, she was willing to give. So again, I do think it takes a special kind of person to do this kind of work. And you do have to have some mental resilience to do it. And not everybody's cut out for that kind of work. But we have lots of other things that they can do. They're not cut out for that.
Well, that's true. And in that kind of high stress scenario, I'll tell you, a lot of listeners could probably take a lot because they're in high stress scenarios in their day to day as well. Not as high stress as what we're talking about, because we're not talking about natural disasters and fatality events, but still to them, it's pretty high stress. Working into the culture, the ability to take a beat and step back and help and watch out for each other, I think could be of supreme value to so many businesses and organizations. I think something they could absolutely learn from what y'all do. Yeah. So I'm glad you went into that. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Me too. That was so good.
Sure. Well, there's research that shows that people who work 70 hours a week don't get any more done than people who work 50 hours a week, because your productivity goes down. And so the first time I told my leadership team I didn't want them to work more than 50 hours a week, they went, ah, ha, 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 okay. But I continue to say that to them. You really need to stop at 50 hours. But that has to become part of the culture, that it's okay to do that.
Linda, what would you say is probably one of the biggest challenges that you're looking to tackle coming up?
I think right now, with staff and the leadership team, we are working really hard to embrace. So I'm very frank. I buy into Brene Brown's clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite sayings. Legit. I say it all the time. So I want to make sure my expectations are clear, because I think it's not fair if I'm not being clear, but yet in my head, I'm holding you accountable for something that I haven't made clear to you. So they are accustomed to that. My leadership team's accustomed to that with me. We're working on filtering that all the way down through the organization, and everybody making sure that we're being clear and kind with our expectations and our holding people accountable and that sort of thing. I think that's really big. I think the other big thing is our overall volunteer pipeline, because our workforce is 90% volunteer, which is why we can devote 90 cents of every dollar to programs. And it's very important that we have a robust volunteer pipeline, and we can see there are leaky points along the pipeline, right? The handoffs, where we lose people, that kind of thing. And so we're working really hard right now to solve that problem, so that we're not losing more volunteers. I mean, maybe we bring in 10 volunteers, maybe we only keep 5 of them. We would like to keep them all when we bring them in. If they've made the commitment and gone in and signed up on our website, right, there's some intention there. And so we should be able to keep them engaged. And so we're working hard to shore that up, which is related to employee retention, right?
Yes.
Like, employee satisfaction, morale, retention, and all of that.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of our strategic goals for our FY30 strategic plan. One is to build a robust volunteer workforce. Another is to build on our strategic partnerships in the community. And the third is to improve our workplace environment, where people feel included, they feel seen, and they want to stay. So that's our strategic goals.
Fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, I got to tell you, I'm so thrilled that we were able to have this conversation with you. I think that there's so much that you do and that your teams do, that are so important for our community. But there's a lot that the general business community can learn from the, 130 year? How many years has it been?
140.
Over 140.
Over 140 year history of the organization. It's fantastic. And I really appreciate your time being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun. It's always great to talk about the Red Cross.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Nice Business Podcast. We hope you got some valuable information and inspiration. We're always looking for great stories that will help your business be more kind and successful. And if you know of one we should hear, or someone that would be a great interview, please let us know. To contact me, click the link here to go to my website, or use this QR code. I wish you a nice business.